Good morning to you all. My name is Simon. I'm the Dean of Lucas School of Arts. And as you can see, I'm not with you in Brussels. Actually, I'm on another Luca campus in Genk, on Sea Mine, a former mining site. So I'm not with you in Brussels. Apologies for that. I hope I will join you later today. And you might have noticed that this is a pre-recorded message. So actually, at the time that you are watching this, I am not in Brussels, but I'm in Leuven, still another city where Luca has a lovely campus. And there is even one more. There's Ghent, the city of Ghent, where we also have a campus. And in those four cities, Brussels, Genk, Ghent, and Leuven, we have a community of 4,500 people, students and staff, working in higher education and research within the broader domain of artistic research and education. So, as you may notice, actually, Lucas School of Arts itself is quite a network organization. So that's why I think we are quite happy to host a full day about governance and governing and debating structures in those kind of network organizations. Of course, we are also a partner in FilmEU, one of the European university initiatives, and that's also an organization in which we are working on governance, as probably all of you are within lots of European universities. Of course, this is not a coincidence, because we are living through a transition which has, I think, a very important consequences for higher education in Europe, and you're quite quite enthusiastic about being part of that transition in this very early stage. So that's why I think today's conference is also very, very important. Of course, all of this takes place in Belgium. It's no coincidence that Luca, as a network organization, is also a Belgian institution. You know, Belgium, it's a bit like little Europe. We have the European capital, which is also the capital of our country, but also we have different languages, we have different communities working together, we have different governments. So if you have some questions about complex governance models, just ask the Belgians and we will come with lots of answers. Maybe not the most efficient or the most simple answers, but we do have a lot of answers when it comes to governance. And so do we at Luca, and so do you all gathered today for this meeting. Again, I hope to join you later today, but for now, let me suffice with wishing you a very, very, very fruitful gathering, a very fruitful meeting where you all can address those wicked questions about how to govern those European universities, those network organizations that will change the shape of higher education and research in Europe for the coming decades. I wish you a very good conference.
Well, thank you for having me here today. Actually, I could wear various hats, and I decided not to wear any one of them. On the one hand, I'm active as board member and as chair of university boards in Switzerland, in Germany, and in Austria. So at the end, I would also like to show you some differences of governance systems in these three countries. I do research and consulting mainly public administrations in the field of sustainable development and the innovation triangle. And I do some research and teaching at the University of Lausanne regarding public sector reform in environmental policies. So I've been all the way throughout my career always working on different levels, on different, in different logics, in different approaches. And I still think this is a very interesting experience for myself because I learn from one sector to the other, for the other. If we go back to what Emily has been describing, she's been describing her challenge and her perception of building up a European network, a European alliance of universities. And while doing so, she has to deal with completely different university systems, legal, governance, political, etc., and has to try to align them in one alliance and with a common perspective. So I would like to take the other angle. I will talk about how to govern an autonomous university with some basic experience. There is one question there, up there, a technical question, I guess. Yeah, but yeah. I will give you some share some basic experience I made and I'm still making at these different levels. I would then start with the question how to have impact within an institution, because in order to align them on a strategic level, you have to work within the institution as well. And then I will focus mainly on the ETH domain, and that's what I have been asked to do so as an alliance of 6 research institutions in itself, governed by a board. Okay, so let's start with some basic insights that I would like. No, now I have to go down. Okay, okay. Science, management, and politics. That's what actually the balls Emily is playing with when she tries to build up her alliance, are 3 completely different systems. And they are 3 completely different systems with different logics. And these different logics can lead to problems. And there is a large risk of misunderstanding at the interface. And at the end, you have to bring all these 3 approaches together if you want to integrate a university within an overarching alliance. So science, management, and politics, 3 different logics and a risk of misunderstanding. And thus I would like to walk you briefly through these 3 different logics, just to be aware of what we're talking about. The logic of science, that's what we all know from our daily commitment, the search for truth, reflecting the intrinsic value of enlightenment, contributing to solving social, economic, and environmental challenges, and at the same time also taking a step back and reflecting on these challenges with a critical distance. And actually it's only by transcending the inherent conflicts of these 3 missions within science already that science adds its particular value to the world. So already within the scientific and academic logic, you have different approaches, different logics that you have to bring together. And now it's again this, which one is it now? Which arrow? Okay, so the logic of management, at the other hand, and that's where all these project support partners from Emily, where they work. It's the management of the university system with, of course, identifying framework conditions, establishing the institutional mission, operating, planning and organizing, looking for financial means, being responsible for controlling, reporting, human resource management, a completely different logic. And these are very important partners also in these alliances, since you saw you have the academics chairing groups, but you always have the supporting people, and they work in this logic. They are not academics per se, even if they may have an academic background. And then politics, again, something completely different. Politics is about finding solutions. for public challenges. These challenges are mainly short and medium term. I think if we would look at our national legislation planning for the last 4 years, no country had foreseen Corona. No country had foreseen, maybe some had foreseen Ukraine, but it can be very short term in politics, and you have to look for acceptance of your solutions. It has solutions decided by politics have to be acceptable for a majority always, be it in the parliament or even if in a referendum. It has always to work within legal frameworks. That's why some alliances also have, of course, challenges, because the legal frameworks of the universities in the different countries are so different. And it has to work within public budgets. Investing public money in a reasonable way, since it's the money of the taxpayers. So again, a completely different logic, and you have actually to bring these three logics together if you want to have a successful university governance. You always have to work on these interfaces between these different logics, and sometimes you're really angry about the other side, because they just don't get it, but they get it, but from another angle. And it's completely legitimate that they get it from a completely different angle, and they have another priority than you do. So what are these interfaces? How are they characterized? You can see the interface of science and management. On the one hand, search for truth. On the other hand, search for solutions. Something completely different. And you always have to oscillate between truth and solution. Effectiveness, individual scientific careers, etc. You can see all the elements, and of course you will be able to go through them afterwards. Completely different sets of interests that you have to bring together if you want to manage an academic institution. Same with working at the interface of science and politics. You have the scientific community, and you have very strong characters, individual scientists, very strong rectors. If I look at my rectors in the ETH domain, they have been elected because they are very strong people. And afterwards, we have to try to steer them. And so it's, of course, not easy, because we need these strong personalities in the management of universities. Interests, scientific progress, scientific careers, sometimes also economic interests of researchers. And on the other hand, the matrix of the indicators of political success are completely different. It's, of course, also scientific progress. Especially the Committee on Science and Education and Culture will be very strongly lobbying for scientific progress, but it's also economic prosperity a parliament has to deal with. It's solving social, economic, or environmental challenges. It's responsibility for taxpayers' monies. It's looking on the return on investment of public money, and it's a responsibility for the overall scientific landscape of a country, not just of your university. So also here, you may have conflicting interests, and that's where strategic boards, like the board of the ETH domain, may bridge the gap and may be translating from one language to the other. Strategic boards, funding agencies, public administrations are always intermediary systems between these two different categories and different logics. And thus, they have become quite important in giving more autonomy to universities within countries, these strategic boards that can bridge over and do the lobbying also, and do the translation in both ways. So, what is my first lesson learned? My first lesson learned is certainly science, management, and politics follow different logics and interests, and they also have completely different timelines. If you're looking for the Higgs boson, that's the issue of your life career, and you will work you will work for 30 years to get that instrument in Geneva looking for that Higgs boson. A politician has to be elected every 4 years. You have to deliver back home in your region, being in Flanders or in Zurich. And that's a completely different approach and impacts the way you govern, the way you take your decisions. Different objectives, different systemic requirements, different expectations and incentives, different kind of expertise. And it's not just, sometimes I meet professors that don't acknowledge that parliamentarians have a very specific expertise. They just think they don't understand what I'm doing. Parliamentarians have a very specific expertise. For example, they are able to work for 2 days on just one legislation paper with about 30 detailed paragraphs, which is a very boring work. It's really handworking, and it's a specific expertise we have to acknowledge. So being aware, accepting, and bridging the gap between these different logics is essential. And thereby, science should not only be on the demanding and receiving end, regarding money, regarding framework conditions, but just as well on the asking and on the offering side. It's not just about politics for science, and I think we have become aware during the pandemic. It's even more about science for politics and supporting evidence-based decision-making with what we do in science. So this was my first part, and so to say, the basics I've learned. And now if we look at an individual university and try to have impact in governing an individual university, I realize that there are very different systems of how they are governed. And there are mainly 3 decisive elements, and they make up and have a lot of consequences for the way you can work within the university, you can have an impact within the university. And it's, on the one hand, the election procedure of the rectorate. That's at the end the key process. How the rectorate, how the rector is elected. Is it a bottom-up process where the University Assembly at the end takes the decision, as it is for the University of Geneva, where I'm chairing the external expert and strategic board? Or is it, as it is for the presidents of the EPFL and the ETH in Zurich, a completely top-down procedure, where the board designs, installs a search committee with external human resource capacities, with external assessment, and looks for what we then believe is the best person. So the election procedure at the beginning of a rectorate is really decisive for the whole dynamic you get within the governance of a university. Then you may have different internal structures within the rectorate. You may have mainly universities rectorates are structured regarding to tasks. You have a vice rector on research, vice rector on education, vice rector on whatever. Some universities, mainly universities of applied science, have a divisional structure where all departments are represented in the rectorate. And also this has an impact on how you work within the university. And the last aspect, the degree of professionalization. We've seen that in Switzerland, where more and more the task of finance, task of building is not managed anymore on the rectorate level by a professor, but by a professional that is hired from outside, with all the academic, with all the responsibilities and votes to write within the rectorate, which was which could not be imagined 10 or 20 years before, where really a rectorate had to consist of academics with an academic background, with an academic, also a HR factor that could be presented as a legitimation. So these 3 elements, the internal structure, the degree of professionalization, and the election procedure, and thus the legitimation of a rectorate has an impact on the governance culture of a university, and will also define the challenges you meet when working with these. So actually, if you build up alliances with different universities, you must know how they tick, because they may tick completely different, even if it looks quite similar from the outside. If you just look at the, oh yeah, there's a rectorate, there is an assembly, the way these elements are conceived are decisive for the way the institution ticks, and that on the long run, that doesn't then depend on people, but on the structure. So in Switzerland, we almost have everything. We have universities that are really top-down. Universities of applied science have divisional structures. Election procedures are different, and the profiles of the member have different degrees of professionalization. And non-academic members are usually now being designated as CFO, because managing the finances of a large university is quite a big ship, huh? And you can't just do it with basics accounting. You have to know how to invest your money. You have to know how to set up the controlling. So that's really a professional job. Constructions is becoming more and more. The more autonomy a university gets, the more professional capacities you need with regards to construction. IT and technology transfer. These are mainly the fields where rectorates in Switzerland tend to hire, to appoint external experts and not professors of their own university anymore. And let me just not forget one issue. Every institution has prevailing biases. And this is certainly the one we all talk about right now, and the gender bias. If you look at how rectorates how many female rectors we have in Europe, so the gender bias, but there are other biases. For example, in Switzerland, it would be very hard to be rector of the EPFL with a Swiss-German background. You have to be French speaking, you have to come from the Romandie. Now ATH Zurich has a rector from the French-speaking part, Joël Mezot. This is possible because the German part of Switzerland is anyhow the strongest part, and by far. So they now accepted a French-speaking rector, but it would not have been possible a couple of years ago. I even remember times when at the ETH Zurich it was important if the rector, the president, was Catholic or Protestant. So we still have these biases within our institutions, and we have to know how to work with them. So lessons learned too. It's always a balance between top-down and bottom-up. Governance means defining strategies, setting frameworks, conditions, assuring financial means, as well as reporting and controlling. And who likes reporting? Have you ever seen a professor who likes reporting? On the other side, it's of course the case that scientific excellence is not developed top-down. It really doesn't. Also, quality management will never lead to excellence. Quality management will always only avoid the worst and assure a certain, so to say, baseline quality, but the excellence comes bottom up. Excellence comes always bottom up, and the freedom of research and teaching is essential to this end. So university governance needs a continuous optimization, looking for the right balance of bottom up and top down. And this will also be the case for these overarching alliances. How much can they really decide top down? How much comes bottom up? You've asked the question regarding research and teaching. It's of course much easier to do a top-down strategy in teaching than in research, because these researchers from these universities will themselves look for their best partner wherever he is, and he or she might not be within the alliance. And they will go for that partner and not for a similarly, but maybe not as excellent partner that they could find within the alliance. Researchers will always go, if they are excellent, they will always go for an excellent partner. So that's really, I guess all these alliances will always be weaker when it comes to research than to teaching and technology transfer, third mission, you name it. So let us move now to Switzerland's ETH domain, since this can be seen as an alliance in itself, combining 6 institutions, 2 universities, 2 large universities with the ETH in Zurich and the EPFL in Lausanne, and 4 research institutes with specific profiles, from large infrastructures at the PSI, water research at EAWAG, material sciences at EMPA, and forest and snow at the VSL. So first of all, I have to show you our complex system in Switzerland. It's a very, and you talked about Belgium being complicated, so we've got the same. On the bottom level, the mandatory school, everything is on the level of the cantons, of the 26 cantons. Then when it comes to professional and second degrees, it's a mixture of national, cantonal, and private, because when it comes to vocational training and education, the sectors, the industries in Switzerland are heavily involved in vocational education and training. And it's actually, even on the top level of universities, it's still a mixture of national and cantonal. The traditional universities are within the responsibility of the cantons, but subsidized by the national authorities. And within such a complicated system, you can imagine that also the political and financial planning takes a lot of time. And I guess this is something you will also experience in building up these alliances, how long it takes in a country to get the thing done. We've moved to 4 years periods of strategic planning and financing. That has an advantage. It gives it gives stability for the sector for 4 years, but it also means it takes, you see, you start planning on the institutional level. The moment you get the money from Bern for the next 4 periods, you start already with planning for the next period. So we just entered the period 22-25 right now, and we on the board of the ETH domain, we have last summer already set the cornerstones for 26 to 29, and for some projects we even know already what will be in our planning for 30 to 33. This is, of course, if you plan for large research infrastructures, you have to look at it gives stability, but it also means that you have very long learning processes. It takes a long time to change something, because when you start learning from one period, you have already set up the next period, and you can actually only learn from period 1 to period 3 if you really want to change something. And this also has to be taken into consideration when building up a larger system of alliances. So political processes take time. They take time, and they are sometimes also a political bazaar, especially when it comes to money. So let us now move to the ETH domain within this system. The ETH domain, as I said, is just run by the Confederation. Has been launched together with the Confederation in 1860 something, in order to strengthen Switzerland's industrial capacity, since we were really a a country of farmers facing an industrial revolution which we were not fit for. So they are really concentrating on science and technology. We have on the one hand, in the yellow part, we have the, so to say, the system, the academic system of the ETH domain with the 6 institutions of the ETH domain. They are autonomous institutions with legal personality. And the board of the ETH domain is an autonomous institution without legal. So we can only govern with our, in German we say Argumentationsmacht, power of argument. We don't have the legal, we have the money and we may have the argument. And these are our two ways of governing such an institution. And I think this will also be the case in the alliances. You will need strong arguments, a lot of competencies, and you will need some money. Otherwise, it will be hard to, if you don't have the legal personality, you cannot really govern as board, as a strategic board. So the board is responsible for the strategic planning for the whole domain. We lead and we represent the domain. We delegate tasks and competencies. We distribute the financial means. That's the toughest meeting every year. It's always in March, and everybody has a bad feeling afterwards. We are responsible for buildings and constructions. That's a specific issue here for the domain. And we are responsible for all the reporting towards the Swiss Confederation. But the quality, the excellence is really delivered by the institutions, and they are autonomous, and we just need a lot of discussions in order to align everybody within a process, because at the end it's the board that is the interlocuteur, inter what in English? L'interlocuteur, der Gesprächspartner with the ministries and with government and with parliament. Buildings is a specific issue. So, cantonal universities in Switzerland usually own their buildings since about the 90s. It has been part of giving more autonomy to the institutions. We don't own them, but we can do whatever we want with them. So that's a good solution. That's a good solution. Yeah, we couldn't sell them anyhow. You can't sell a main building of an ETH. So when it comes to what the board does, or what also a board of an alliance will have to do, it's really a bridging function between the political logic and the logic of a public administration, which is something different as well. That's much more management than politics, and an academic logic on the other side. And we're, so to say, the ones who try to bridge over from one logic to the other. And that means a constant translation, simultaneous translation in various languages, always. And on the level of alliances, Emily will be the person who will have to know all these different languages, to address politicians with their language, to convince them with the arguments that they believe are important. On the other hand, looking that bottom-up excellence develops within the framework of what they have foreseen on the strategic level. In order to assure this constant translation, we have been building up a huge comprehensive planning process with 4 years planning, with intermediate evaluations, always after 2 years, and with annual reportings. And I think I'm bringing this, having this aligned is not always easy. But lesson learned, my third lesson learned, actually it's not just about governing an institution. Governance is never a goal in itself, even though sometimes it will be easy, we just do it for ourselves. But governance is never a goal in itself. The overarching goal is to provide framework conditions for excellent teaching, research and knowledge transfer, and at the same time assuring that taxpayers' money is spent effectively and efficiently. We always have to keep that also in mind, even though we know that all these controlling processes, auditing, the EU horizon auditing is something of, is one of the worst, maybe. It's really tough. So keeping this in mind and assuring this, that's the task of governance. And what we need, I guess, is an autonomy of academic institutions combined with clear reporting and controlling systems. So to say, governance at arm's length. If we really want to assure that excellence is provided, not only in research, but also in teaching and in tech transfer. And if I go back now to the 3 countries I'm working in, I can see some clear differences. In Switzerland, we have a completely decentralized system. Cantons responsible except for the national ETH domain. We have legal frameworks that allow for a lot of strategic autonomy. Legal frameworks are quite open when I look at our legal provisions, and we have a lot of money. And autonomy and a lot of money, that's actually the essence of the recipe. If I go to Germany, it's still centralized, but of course the Länder are responsible. Of course, they are much larger. Their legal frameworks are much more restrictive than in Switzerland. If I see in Saxony, the university is not able to appoint an additional professor, even if they have the third-party money, because the numbers of professors is fixed in the framework agreement with the state of Saxony. Something which could never happen in Switzerland. If a university gets the money, they can appoint a new professor. So, and at the same time, what I realized that in Germany, the freedom of research and teaching is even stronger than in Switzerland. And I guess that's against the background of their history with Nationalsozialismus and with the DDR history. So protecting freedom of research and teaching is very fundamental in Germany. And so having not much money, strong legal framework conditions, a lot of freedom from bottom up, makes the marge de manœuvre for rectorates quite limited. That means they have to align with national initiatives if they want to get more money. And if I go to Austria, it's again completely different. They have one national law for all universities. Every university follows the same national law. There are negotiations between the universities and Vienna concerning the implementation also of a national, they also have a national strategy plan, but that's quite open. So there are the negotiations. Every university has to negotiate with Vienna regarding their own strategies. Also, this will have to be taken into account when working with universities in Austria within the alliances. And even the buildings are planned and constructed by Vienna. With construction plans for the big regions. Now in Graz, they told me last week, finally we get that new physics building. We have been waiting for 12 years because it had to fit within the priorities of national construction plan. So it's really completely different systems, and working across these completely different systems makes up for the challenges Emily has to deal with. Thank you.
thank you, Barbara, for the very nice presentation, and indeed another view on what an alliance and a governance of an alliance can be. And I also realized that Belgium is not in Belgium, it's even, in Switzerland, it's even more complicated than in Belgium. I have 3 questions. The first one was your first slide where you indicated these 3 pillars. You have the science, management, and politics. And you, in further discussion, you really interfaced the science and the politics. And I was wondering this management, because I sometimes think it's that management is also the interface between the science and the politics. And I didn't see this in your presentation. Yeah. Can you comment on this?
Yeah, you're right. Actually, it depends on the structure of the university. If you have a strategic board, then it's the strategic board that takes over the interface to politics, and the management will rather talk to the public administrations. And that's not the same like as politics, but of course also the administration of a university is. When I gave a similar talk to the public administration in Bern, they said, okay, we've never thought about that, but of course also even we are translating always from one department to the other, from the finance department to the science department. So being aware that we are working in multiple logics, in multiple languages is certainly important.
And then the question, the biases, you only briefly mentioned them, the bias in different kinds of bias, gender bias, but also language bias. I also don't think a Flemish university ever had a French-speaking rector. This bias, or solving this bias, or how do you call it, working to diminish the bias, does it work better in one model, the bottom-up or the elected management, or is that not proven? So I wonder, is there a better model to come up with
biases?
Yeah, or to solve biases, or to...
I don't know, but I lately had a discussion with female professors who are in a specific training in order to take over responsibilities and within their institutions. And what they actually came up with is that they said, actually, the most that they would prefer top-down procedures to bottom-up, because they experience a lot of intransparency in bottom-up election procedures, and a lot, they said, there might be more game playing in bottom-up processes than in top-down.
And that's you would expect it's the other way around, but I can understand that it's not so transparent, and something that lives in a community can then also be enforced.
In universities in Switzerland, cantonal universities, of course, a rector is elected bottom-up by mainly the university assembly. Some people don't like to expose themselves to such a procedure, and so it has a bias already in what kind of people would present themselves in such kind of procedures. You may get some people, if you go headhunting, you may get some other people than if you work bottom up. But of course, the legitimation is strong. When you get elected bottom up, you have a strong legitimation from bottom up. You may have to get the legitimation from your strategic board, where when a rector is elected top down, he has first to work to get the legitimation also bottom up. So you always have to counterbalance, so to say, the way you have been elected.
And my third question, I didn't know, so that you mentioned the strategic board, you have argument. So you have the argument, but you also said we have the money, and I didn't know. You have the money. How can this be without a legal and as a non-legal entity? Can you have money without a legal?
Yeah, that's a construction that has been chosen. We get the, so to say, global envelope for the whole domain of these six institutions, and we distribute the money. So to say, as representatives of the parliament, we distribute the money, and afterwards it's the institution that has the competence to spend it. We don't spend it, we just distribute it. But of course, that's really a strategic decision. And we've not come up. We once, a couple of years ago, we tried to develop indicators that would help us distribute the money, and we completely failed. We really completely failed, because at the end we always realize, well, we're comparing pears and apples, and it's not really waterproof what these indicators. We still have the indicators and we still keep them, but they would just give us, they are interesting on the long run. In einer Längsschnittanalyse, they would show us if one of the institutes is running into problems, but we can't use them really to differentiate and to say this one is better than the other, because everyone has a specific task and specific portfolio. Yeah, but it's an interesting question how do we got from politics the task to distribute the money based on impact. And I think politics didn't really realize what kind of task they were giving to us, because we can't do that. We can't say this institution has a larger, we don't know how to measure impact. That has such a long, it's really on the long run with external effects, and so wouldn't be fair.
That were my 3 questions. I'm now looking at the audience and I saw their hand raised.
Thanks a lot for the talk. I don't want to enter the debate, which is the most complex national system, because I think you don't want to hear anything about complexity in Italy. So better not to enter that debate. No, I actually have 2 questions. The first one regarding the 3 logics, very nice perspective. I like it. My question, perhaps provocative, do you see any hierarchical situation between these logics?
Any
hierarchical situation.
Hierarchical.
Yeah. And the second question, I don't know if you want to.
I think they are just completely different. Of course, at the end, the management logic is on the operational level and should follow the logic of politicians and of academia. But in everyday life, management can be very tough and strong. So I would not really have a hierarchy between these 3 different approaches.
Okay, and I might have forgotten my second question,
Oh,
but it will come later, perhaps.
Oh
no, yeah, here it is. So if I understood correctly, the ETH is an individual that talks with the government and parliament and who gives money, actually. Do you think that in the situation of a European university, we should have a single voice with the European Commission, or more each alliance should battle with the Commission? What do you think could be the best setting? I mean, at an institutional level, because we have a 4U2, 4U1 and 4U2 association, but shall we work to make them stronger as a single representative, single voice towards the via European Commission or not?
Well, regarding the overarching ambition of the Commission to strengthen the whole European research area, that's their ambition with these alliances. I would think it would be good to have on the other side, not a single, but a united, a coherent Ansprechpartner.
So thank you very much, Barbara. Just also two questions. So the first one is actually also an explanation why we looked at ETH. I'm not sure if Pedro explained it to you. So when we started looking at potential governance models for the European universities, we actually looked at the case study of the Swiss applied institutions.
Universities for Applied Science.
Yeah. Because there were some similarities in terms of the profile of the institutions with our alliance, and we thought it would be interesting to look at how the governance models have evolved, and that's how we discovered, so to say, the ETH domain case study. And my first question is the concept of the domain, because it links to what Verle said, because it's really puzzling the fact that you don't have a legal entity. My question is a very practical one. How are you legitimized? How is the management of that board that you have there on your schematics? Because my understanding is that you are not elected, so you are nominated by someone.
We are elected by the federal government.
Ah, okay.
So that's a strong mandate. We are elected by the federal government, and we have a quite substantial staff. We have about 40 people working for us, for our board. So we have a lot of, in order to strengthen our power of argument, we've been building up a team of about 40 experts.
Because I can imagine it's a very tough place to be in, because you basically have them, and the fact that you have no legal entity, I was puzzled by that. Okay, so that was my first question. How are you legitimized? Okay.
Yeah.
The second one has to do with this very interesting model of planning that you've mentioned, because I think that the main challenge for the European universities is the funding one. And I know that in the end, it seems we are only talking about money, but I think we have to talk about money in terms of strategic planning. My question is, in that 4 years period, where is the budgeting?
The budget is, we get a global envelope for 4 years from Parliament. And this is, of course, then, as all countries work with annual budgets at the end, it can change a little bit throughout these 4 years. But actually, we got an overarching envelope, and we know what we can expect for the next 4 years, if not a substantial crisis occurs in Switzerland. This global envelope is given to the board, and we distribute the money to we give the money to the institutions according to internal discussions. How much should ETH Zurich? For years, there was, so to say, a consensus that ETH should get 50%, EPFL should get 25%, and the 4 research institutes should get together 25%, and from these 25%, 50% would go to PSI with the large research infrastructures, and the small one would get less. So that was, so to say, a algorithm we decided once, and that solved a lot of crisis situation and problems for a couple of years. But after a couple of years, we had to realize, well, EPFL has developed so much, it's just not fair to give them only half what ETH Zurich gives. So it took a couple of years and a couple of discussions to adjust and now we're not on a fixed algorithm anymore.
And that takes me to my last question, because it has to do with the layers that you presented, because the way we see it, we have an extra layer there, which is the layer of the European politics level in tension with the layer of the national politics level. And that adds a level of complexity that touches the issue of planning and funding, because the planning and funding that is done at the national level is often not compatible with the planning and funding at the, let's call it, European layer.
Right.
So,
and as soon as you want to work across borders, you're confronted with this challenge.
so my question is, when you look at because you've mentioned there the Confederation as an entity that provides money, let's put it simplistic. My question is, does the Confederation also provide strategic guidance or says something like, in terms of KPIs, by 2030, you need to attain these KPIs, and that's it?
Not
or
at
does
that
it not?
level, not at that precision level, but some guidelines are given, strategic guidelines, but they are developed together with the institutions. But they are more generic than really KPIs. We realize that we tried to develop these KPIs internally, and we were not really successful. You can have some if you have really a concrete task, very specific task. But if you go for basic science, you're lost with the KPI.
Hi, Ronan here from IDT in Ireland. Thanks for your presentation. I've kind of a comment that leads to a question. I'm just struck by the fact that you come from the partners and the experience you seem to predominantly have is Swiss, Austrian, and German, which presumably comes from a similar cultural, shall we say, experience of education. And I'm just wondering about your advice. We had a series of talks in our own research around this, looking at models. And part of the thing that keeps emerging for me is our understanding of language, if nothing else, and our understanding of what is governance, what is management, what are the competencies. So I suppose my question really is, how did you establish a common language when you go back, or how, even through your consultancy, how do you establish what everyone understands by governance? And this question I was always struck by an Italian commentator who we had in at one point is, what is governance for? What is it for? And I'm just wondering, when you have engaged with these kinds of questions, because like the Irish experience, the Portuguese experience, the Italian, any experience is very different, very much more different really than and trying to even find a common language is problematic.
Well, actually, I've been working in all sectors. I'm working as a professor. I'm working as a consultant. I have been a politician for many years, for my life, and I'm now on strategic board. So I realize that I've learned a lot, and it takes a lot of time. When I moved to Germany with the board of the TU Dresden, I realized, well, here I have to learn an even additional language, and in Austria as well. So it's just about learning and about realizing that it's always different. I was really surprised last week when I learned in Graz that all their buildings are constructed by Vienna in a multi-annual plan, because that would not be acceptable in Switzerland at all. But every system has its advantages and its disadvantages, and you have to learn how to address and work within that system.
So it's very important that you have these three heads.
Yeah, that's
why the first slide, so
yeah.
You don't wear them now, but it's very important that you have it in this in between. Are there other questions? Okay.
Yes, thank you for the approach, because it was original one to the subject. You emphasize that you have not a legal entity, right? But it's a decision that you make. And can you explain how you arrived to that was better option?
I didn't get the question. Could you repeat?
Yeah, you said that you decide not to have a legal entity, or?
Oh, no, that was
a decision.
That's a constant discussion.
Yeah, so this were my question.
Politics decided that the board should not have a legal entity, and the institutions are quite happy. It was, if you remember, I had the slide with the buildings on the side. Actually, the Confederation would like to hand us over the ownership of the buildings. but they don't want to hand it over to the 6 institutions. They would like to hand it over to the board. And that would mean that the board would have to have legal entity to be owner of all these buildings, and the institutions don't accept. So it's just so to say, a consensus or a compromise between the politics and the institutions, that the board gets the money but has no legal entity. And it means really that we need a lot of strategic discussions within the board. And when new members arrive in the board, we are all experts from somewhere, industries represented. I don't really know what I am representing. I'm representing a little bit of everything. Academia is represented. So when specifically when new members arrive that are from the economic sector, they are always used to just, well, why can't we have KPIs on a 3 month schedule and take clear decisions and so on. So that doesn't work with academia. So it's really working without really decisive power, soft power, convincing power.
And how do you manage, for example, because you said you have a big team of people working there.
We have a team, yes, a strong team.
And how do you hire the people? Or it's people from the institutions, or?
No, the board hires these people.
And who hire? The board has the capacity to hire them without legal entity.
Yes. Well, the president has the right to hire people.
Okay. It's
just
a strange formula
yeah.
for me at least. Okay.
Yeah,
so that an individual can hire someone. No. So.
Are there other questions? Are there questions online? No questions online. I have one question. The spending, or not spending, the dividing the money between the institute, is that project based? Then do they have applied?
We give them annual budgets.
Okay, and this is discussed, and they have like to come up with a program,
they come with a program.
Oh, okay.
And it's discussed annually.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we can close this session. And is it lunchtime already? It's lunchtime. So we go down the hill again. Up, no, up, otherwise there's no food down. Thank you very much.